Welcome to this edition of Taking Care of Business. I'm Beth Sewald, President and CEO of the Vegas Chamber. You know, the Nevada legislative session just wrapped up, and the Vegas Chamber and our government affairs team was there relentlessly every single day advocating on behalf of you, the business community throughout Nevada. Today, we're going to dive into the wins, the challenges, and the successes that we had as a Chamber of Commerce on behalf of you, the business community. So stay with us. Taking Care of Business is up next. Now it's time to welcome our panelists to the stage. If you would all make your way up as I announce your names, please join me in welcoming Jim and Jessy Wadhams, partners Black Wadhams, the Director of Government Affairs at Black Wadhams, Amy Shogren. Amy, please join us. And the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber, Paul Moradkhan. Paul.
You know, we're driven by data and numbers, and you take a step back for a session and people say, well, what were the takeaways? When you think from that perspective, there's over 1,200 BDRs and bills requested from the legislators, from state agencies, from the governor's office. And that's a significant amount of bills that we go through. And the chamber staff goes through all the bills. And obviously, as you see the breakdown, you know, over 600 bills from the state assembly, 500 over the Senate, and then 57 resolutions. And that is proportioned to where they are because the rules that dictate the number of bills by each legislator. So that's just a quick snapshot of the bills that set the stage for the session. Out of that 1,200 bills, the chamber monitored 879 of them. That means we were tracking, watching for amendments, and that was about 75% of all bills in the system. Out of that, the chamber testified on 204 and were actively engaged on those bills. This is the largest portfolio of any trade association or chamber in the state, and we would argue the largest right after the governor's office probably. But it shows you our breadth of why we're involved with so many bills. And that's because we represent 70 different sectors of the economy. So every single person in this room, we were looking out for your interests, as you know. Out of those bills and so forth, we identified 91 bills that were problematic to the business community. Out of that, and this is by the Chamber, the Resort Association, Restaurant Association, retail, we worked as a collaboration, like Mary Beth said, and we fixed 24 of those. 24 bills were fixable. We could negotiate, we could compromise, and we fixed 24. 41 bills we killed, and that means the business community as a whole, through legislative process, through working with committee chairs, leadership, bill sponsors, maybe not them, but got their bills killed from the process way. And then, of course, there was a veto list submitted to the governor and his staff, and they vetoed 26 bills that were problematic to the business community that you just cannot fix the premise of a bill. For example, on nurse staff ratios, SB 182. Either you agree with the ratio mandate or you don't. There's no way of fixing it. And if you follow this pie chart where it says 16 with a business climate, it goes clockwise, and it goes business climate, elections, social issues, public safety, labor. So if you follow it that way like a clock, it shows you the breakdown. The governor vetoed 87 bills this session. Last session, he vetoed 75. This governor's had to veto more bills than any other governor in Nevada's history. And part of that conversation I was having with Mary Beth was, well, is that proportion to other states? And when you look nationally, a governor is going to veto about 15% of all bills that session, typically. And so this is about 14%, so that's about average, actually, but high for Nevada standards. You know, when I first started the chamber 15 years ago, there may be 5 or 6 vetoes. I mean, we're definitely in the higher bracket now, and that's for a variety of issues. Maybe the bills are badly drafted. Maybe there's issue about one branch trying to overtake another branch, and that's where you see on those legislative card at the bottom. You know, there's some bills that really were trying to expand the authority of the legislative body. AB 600 is a good example over the courts. I know Jessy had flagged that bill originally because, like, what are they trying to do here? And it wasn't legislators, it was LCB. But I mean, these bills show you just the composition of the governor's looking at, right? Business climate was the largest, right? That was vetoed. Then you look at elections, of course, and that was about voter ID, drop boxes, and so forth. Social issues are issues the chamber typically doesn't get involved with, but those are going to be a lot more issues about. They have several bills about declaring different days and so forth, and social causes. Again, things we don't engage with. Public safety. This was an interesting one. This was more about criminal justice reforms or rollbacks or moving forward on juvenile courts. Again, an issue we don't typically get involved with. Of course, we get involved with labor issues, and that's that darker pie chart right there that overlays with the business issues. several taxpayer bills also that were concerned to the state budget and what that looked like. Healthcare, I will say I've gained a new respect for how much they have to deal with, and we worked very closely with the Hospital Association on this. There were some education bills and collective bargaining bills that were not going to be helpful to securing student achievement efforts. Legislative bills we just talked about, and environmental justice causes. So a very broad spectrum what the governor is looking at. But again, without Governor Lombardo, this business community would be in a very different position today. So a big round of applause to the governor, his staff, and their work, because we're in a much better spot because of those vetoes secured by the governor and working with the business community. Just real quickly, and we'll get to the panel in a moment, I was talking to our lobbyists this morning, and like, what good business bills came through? And those really were driven by the chamber and the business community as a whole. So increased transparency. Our theme this session was, why does accountability matter? As a business community, we need to know when public knows it's going to happen. So we worked very closely with Freshman Assemblymember Flanagan to get this bill. Now there's going to be a 3-day notice process. Improved business impact statements, AB 444. Raise your hand if you ever had to deal with a state agency in this room. Well, this bill will now require them to notify the Chamber of Commerce, the trade associations, NRA, to make sure we're notified when they're doing a proposal change, that we then notify you. A huge transparency issue for the state. And then 2 other ones real quickly, and I know this was actually probably one of the more entertaining ones. The state was not required to take electric form of payments from businesses for paying their bills. Some still only took money orders or cash. Common sense sometimes fails. So we had to bring this bill forward and work with Senator Taylor, and of course, one of the most important bills is multi-jurisdictional licensing, enabling that. A huge win for the business community as a whole, and again, worked with Senator Steinbach on that. These were all pro-business bills that are going to make your life easier as a business, and these are things that we've worked with on years, trying to support our small business members. So that really drove that agenda. And then just quickly, so we can get to our panel, these are just some of the Southern Nevada foreign bills that were passed, of course, from voting rights for school board trustees. It ended up in the final bill with the governor and Senator Canzero. Public accessible dashboards. Inland Port Authority was probably the most significant economic development bill to get through. Graduate medical education, healthcare worker shortage, fuel revenue indexing, AB 530. And I just want to cite this real fast. This was a massive win for the business community, residents, construction, transportation, RTC. Last session, a similar bill was vetoed by the governor because the effort that went into address those concerns and now ensures we have the funding to continue road construction in the state and to keep the orange cone as a state flower. So great work over there. And this real fast, we're going to get into this in a second. Some of the major issues for the session. We know about film tax, microbreweries to make sure they could still operate, the governor's public health authority bill, attainable housing. These were all driving the end game, as they say in Carson City. Education reform, of course, economic development, modernization. These were all extremely important as we close out the session. And then, of course, more healthcare policy. We like to have our police officers on the street, work very closely with the Resort Association on this, and Senate Majority Leader make sure we keep 800 officers on the streets, and some criminal justice reforms that we'll talk about in a moment. But a very broad session, and I think the takeaway is no one bill drove this session. It was a multitude of things that were really reforming this, because one of the conversations I was having with Jim and Jessy during the session is, what is the one big thing? And the one big thing was that we as a business community had to work together to get these through or defeat. So as we wrap up and go into the panel, know that your business community united and worked well together. It was over 20 different partners to ensure that this business community is stronger, more stable, and more united than ever before. So that's one of the major takeaways.
The Chamber's representation of small businesses here in Nevada, up in Carson City at the legislature, is just invaluable to small businesses. The vast majority of small businesses, if you look at the lobbyists that are in the room, they're mostly they work full-time for the utilities or big resort associations. They don't necessarily represent, like I don't have a lobbyist. You know, most of my small business clients can't afford a lobbyist, so having the Chamber watch our back where we can't be there is really the most valuable part of our Chamber membership.
2025 is bringing big changes for Nevada businesses. If you have more than 5 employees and have been operating for 3 years or more, you must now comply with new state retirement plan mandates. The Vegas Chamber 401k plan makes it easy, offering a proven, customizable, and cost-effective plan for employers and employees to save with tax advantages. Visit vegaschamber.com to explore options and see how the Vegas Chamber can help you start saving for your future. There are a lot of new dynamics happening, at the session this year, and you and I talked a lot about it all year leading up to this session. But give us an overview, kind of now that session's over, looking back over the last 120 days, what do you think are some of the themes and the highlights of this session?
It's been fascinating to see how this session is different, and it's different in two ways. One, the element that hasn't been mentioned in any of the slides, Washington, D.C., that changed the tenor of this session. Yeah. In December, the Economic Forum had met and indicated fairly stable conditions for the budget. They met again in May, just to fast forward, and things had changed significantly. In between December and May, we had the beginning of a new administration in Washington, D.C., which began a significant change and disruption in the direction of the federal government. And I think that disrupted the state legislative process. In the first 2 weeks of the legislative session, we had committees that were trying to decide and identify the risk that could come by losing federal funding. At that particular area, the first thought was Medicaid funding, which is a huge hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that the state relies on. But other areas of federal funding apply to our state budget. That disrupted everything and everybody. Suddenly people were unsure, they were anxious. We didn't know when that big shoe was going to fall, and yet the legislators knew they had to proceed because constitutionally they start on June 3rd and they end on February 3rd and start on June 2nd, so they had a limited time. So there was a lot of tension waiting for that May decision. Fortunately, I think it was still bad. It was still let down, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been and as it was anticipated. Now the big shoe is yet to come, so we may have a special session. But let me identify a couple of things. This sheet is interesting in the statistics, but one thing that's not in this sheet, our legislature meets for 120 days, and if you look at May 19th, that's the 106th day. That leaves 14 days in the legislature. On the 106th day, on May 19th, the governor had 5 bills on his desk. 5. Out of 1,200 bills introduced, there were 5 on his desk on May 16th. So in the last 2 weeks, the legislature processed 600 bills. I mean, do the math, that's incredible. And so you might wonder, why did it take so long? And there's lots of answers to that. Anxiety is part of the problem. The uncertainty is part of the problem. But also making sure that all the cards are dealt before you start playing your hand is also part of the problem. This is a political process. And it's interesting that everything has now been pushed to the back end of the legislature. The bills that had been introduced early in the session just waited and waited. And so the process is highly, highly intensive, watching and waiting for that break when the legislature starts to move, because when it moves, everything breaks loose all at once. So it was a fascinating process. And I'd be remiss, Mary Beth, if I didn't mention that the key linkage for the chamber, and I've had the pleasure of representing them now for a dozen years, is the connection between the actual business community through the Board of Trustees, through the Government Affairs Committee, through the Chief Executive of both the association and the President, through the lobbying team. It connects the business community together. Paul Moradkhan is somewhat humble about sorts of things, but he has organized at least 20 to 25 trade associations to meet regularly to keep the voice of business unified and coordinated. There's lots of issues that one business voice can't deal with, but collectively we can be consistent on those issues that are common to all business. So this legislative session was fascinating, and it put to a test the actual process that the chamber uses to stay on top of this. Once again, 600 bills moving in the last 14 days.
How would you guys say that this session was maybe a little bit different than other sessions, and kind of what were the highs and lows?
The session really was about anticipation, right? There was no overarching theme. It was a session of sort of waiting on what shoe was going to drop. Is the is the federal government going to change budgeting radically that impacts how Nevada gets a lot of its dollars that operate, programs in healthcare or education, things like that. So, and then you had a lot of just, as Jim pointed out, right, there's a lot of backloading of the legislature. So again, it was a session about just waiting for something to happen, I think. And that really sort of, I think, colored the whole experience of what the session was about.
One thing that we talked about as the session kind of came down was you had a lot of lack of compromising that you might have had in previous years on amendments, on bills, and that didn't really seem to happen a ton, as well as amendments were obviously conceptual and you didn't really see them until, maybe they've already moved and they've moved around. So that was also very challenging this session, was that really lack of compromise or really lack of getting to the right area. And then also just, the amendment process was extremely challenging this session.
I would just say quickly on that, I think what you're going to see is this session set the stage for a lot of conversation 27, a lot of deferments, a lot of push out effective dates, a lot of bills, not this session on revenue, for example, they'll be dealt with potentially 27. So Jesse's point, a lot of anxiety and deferment to understand what the feds are going to do for 27. So I think you're going to see that emerging in the next next few months and so forth. We get a little more clarity in the feds, but 27 will definitely be a session of interest.
The state never stops. Government never stops. The process will go on and it will come back. And I think the anticipation is both correction of what happened and preparation for what will happen. And I think that really is extraordinarily good advice to keep that perspective, is that this legislative session is done. It doesn't mean that there won't be another one. And that's both good and bad. We've got to be prepared.
What exactly happened with film tax?
But I think it's interesting because this film tax credit has been an issue, and it was really important. And from the standpoint of economic activity in the state, the thought of becoming Hollywood 2.0 and having film studios and having movie stars at the local restaurants and whatever fantasy we might have was really pretty attractive. Also bringing in a whole new industrial sector that is similar to what we've had in Las Vegas in entertainment and shows, but still different in terms of the production and the film was exciting. And I think a lot of people looked at that in a very positive way as adding a whole new element to our economy. The problem, once again, comes back to Washington, D.C., and comes back to a budget that is now appearing to be flat, and by the end of May, by the middle of May, appears to be lower. And the issue is the difference between tax deferral, tax abatement, and tax credit. And when Mary Beth announced this topic, it was film tax credit. And so the fundamental way that this was going to work is that there would be a credit granted. And that is the functional equivalent of cash from the general fund. And I think that notion caused significant unrest throughout the legislative body who are trying to figure out how are we going to fund our favorite projects? How are we going to maintain what we call a Christmas tree at the end and yet be giving away substantial amounts of money to get an industry here? And I think that quandary, that challenge, is actually what slowed it down. And I'm not sure that it's gone. It might come back. But it did not get through this session. And if you wanted to see some drama in our legislature, the day that bill the Assembly bill moved out of the Assembly, it was like watching one of the playoff ice hockey games or basketball games. It was a 21-21 tie, and lights were blinking, and it seemed like it lasted for 10 minutes. Couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 seconds. And then a button flipped and it became 22-20. It was just that close to get it out of the first house. And it never got heard into the second house because of that tension in the body. And frankly, I think it was due to the potential impact on the general fund and the cash flows in the state.
When you said it was like hockey, I thought you were going to say there were hip checks in the hall, which I think there were those too, right?
There were plenty of hip checks and sharp elbows.
I say this as someone, I think it would actually work in Southern Nevada. I do. I think it would actually, I think you'd get a lot of filmmaking here. I think it would create an industry, but I think you have to factor in, ultimately, at the end of the day, what is the cost to create that industry? And one of the interesting factoids I heard, and I know the press is here, so I have to be a little careful so I don't get quoted exactly, but roughly the amount that was going to be credited was actually almost equivalent to the amount that was raised by the gold and silver mining tax that was created right out of the pandemic. And so you're saying, oh, let's give this credit over to this after we just raised this from this other industry. And so you sit there and go, wow, I mean, there is a cost to this. Again, are we willing to pay that cost? And again, I think in a time of, in a session of just uncertainty, that cost becomes a little more difficult to sort of justify.
Paul, we talked a lot about this. This was arguably the most successful session in the history of the chamber in terms of bills, good bills that were passed, bad bills that were killed or modified. Can you talk to us a little bit more in depth about which ones kind of were the most controversial and really, bottom line, what this session meant to the business community here?
Absolutely, Mary Beth. And I think that, first of all, the business community has proven itself over and over again in the last 10, 15 years that when we work together, we're a stronger business community. And we have many of the trade association partners in the room. So I want to thank everybody in the room for that, because to your point, Mary Beth, there were a lot of bad bills. But when we take a step back, there were bad bills that impacted hospitals. There were bad bills that impacted general business. There were bad bills that impacted our construction members. And when you look at that, in retrospect, yeah, of course it got done. But if it isn't with this whole room helping, it wouldn't have been done. But one of the worst bills this session, because it was so badly written, was AB 388. Regardless of if you believe in paid family leave or not, the way how that bill was drafted was going to be so problematic for employers to follow, to implement, and also it was also going to include the state. And so there was a state employment requirement too. But we knew from day one that there was this one of those bills you just couldn't negotiate on because the premise and drafting was so badly done, there was just no way to fix that bill. And so that was one of those examples. There were other bills like AB 414. It would have required new environmental standards and monitoring for employers, expensive ones, for our convention and warehouse members. Again, on the premise of the policy, maybe, but then when you see what the political factors were, it was a non-starter for the business community as well. You look at our hospital members, and I have a newfound respect for our hospital members. They're constantly under attack, either from mandates, rate negotiations, and so forth. So there's that piece of it. And then you look in terms of other bills, in terms of our construction members, for example. They're dealing with prevailing wage expansion, project labor agreement expansion. Those are problematic. You look at our realtors and so forth. They had summer evictions, AB 201. We had caps on buying of homes, SB 319. It just goes on and on and on. But the one bill I do want to share with you, Mary Beth, and we talked about it, is Nevada had one of the worst artificial intelligence bills in the country, SB 199. Our colleagues at the U.S. Chamber had reached out and said, this is the worst AI bill in the country. And so it was that problematic and well-intentioned by the bill sponsor, but there was no way of really fixing that bill. And if that bill had gone forward, along with other things, it was almost a death by 1,000 cuts because there were so many problematic bills. So again, because of the work of the business community as a whole, we were able to stop those. And you look at that, talk about those 91 bills we've identified, they were killed, vetoed, or mitigated. So I'm confident to say not a single bad bill got through this session. And that's where we talk about is a huge win for the Nevada business community.
Thanks, Paul. And I know when I get a call from the U.S. Chamber saying Nevada's got the worst AI bill in the country, they're saying, Mary Beth, really? Really? What are you guys doing out there? So thanks for all your work on that. 2025 is bringing big changes for Nevada businesses. If you have more than 5 employees and have been operating for 3 years or more, you must now comply with new state retirement plan mandates. The Vegas Chamber 401k plan makes it easy, offering a proven, customizable, and cost-effective plan for employers and employees to save with tax advantages. Visit vegaschamber.com to explore options and see how the Vegas Chamber can help you start saving for your future.
Cox has been a valuable supporter of this community for more than 25 years. We're here for you, your home, your business, your life. With Cox, you can do more of what you love every day. From Allegiant Stadium to your home, when the game is on the line, Cox Fiber helps everyone enjoy a winning experience. Extraordinary speed, exceptional reliability. You can count on Cox to keep you connected. And now with Cox Mobile, you can take that excellence on the go. We're here for your business too. With the technology you need to take on whatever's next, our reliable network has been critical to the growth plan of businesses from coast to coast. At Cox Business, helping you succeed is what drives us. We're proud to help businesses everywhere reach their customers and their goals. Our Cox Media team strives to be the full-service advertising partner you've always wanted. With over 30 years of media and advertising expertise, Cox Media can be the team behind your marketing success, so you can get back to doing more of what you love every day, bringing the world to your door, or your door to the world, and all at the speed of light.
It's that time when we all come together. Bright minds, bold hearts, now more than ever. Ideas rising, voices strong. We've been building all year long. We've got something real to say. Building brighter every day. The chamber comes, we stand as one, celebrating what we've done. We rise together, strong and proud. Our voices clear, our purpose loud. Our purpose loud.
Aloxa has been a member since the beginning of this year, and it has been a great experience just to get our name out in the community and, getting to meet other people that are involved in the community. But through this partnership that we've been, with the Chamber, 'cause they're really a partner in our business, we've been able to get 2 really big contracts, like Fortune 500 companies, through people that I've met in the Chamber. So it's been like a lot of opportunity for us. And we just hope to continue to give back to the community the way that they've been given to us and to continue growing our business.
The end of the 2025 legislative session marks not only an end of the session, but a brand new beginning for business across the state of Nevada. It's an opportunity for our business community to take what's been decided in Carson City and turn it into momentum and growth for all of us across this entire state. At the Vegas Chamber, we are and continue to be your strongest advocate, not only for business, for jobs, but for economic development in general. Thanks so much for watching Taking Care of Business. I'm Mary Beth Sewald.